Okay, kiddos, welcome back. Now we are moving on to 9.2. We're going to talk about some special right triangles. Now, we talked about right triangles last time when we talked about the Pythagorean theorem, but now we're going to talk about two special ones, and they are going to be a 45, 45, 90 and 30, 60, 90. Okay, so we'll talk about both of those. So one on one side, one on the other. So let's talk about first 40, 40, 45, 45, 90 special right triangles. Okay, so these are going to be the angles of the triangle. So it looks like this. All right, so we know it's 90, which is right over there, right? And then if this side is equal to this, right, then we know that the angles across from them are also equal, right? And if they're equal, they have to be 45. Right? If that one's 90, because they all add up to 180, right? So a 45, 45, 90 triangle is created when we have a square cut in half diagonally. Okay? Square cut in half diagonally. So diagonally, of course, means like this, right? So if we did that, let's go ahead and do that together. All right, so if we did that, we would just go from that corner to that corner, right? So if we know that that's 90, right, and that's 90 because it's a square, right, then we know that if we cut this in half, right, then this part has to be 45, right, and then this part has to be 45 because it has to add to that same 90 degrees, right? So if that's 45 and that's 90, this one has to be 45 also, right? And then this one's 45, right? So that's what happens. When we cut it diagonally, it's going to create a special right triangle like this. Okay, so once we know that, first off, we know that these are both 45, and then we know whatever this side is, this one's also going to be the same length. Okay, then if we know this, then we can figure out this because it's square root of 2 times bigger. So the square root of 2 is equal to, everybody type that into your calculator with me. All right, so you can go to Desmos and type that right in, and that's going to be approximately 1.414, right? So we use this a lot in math, square root of 2. So instead of writing it all out, and actually that's not all of it, right? It keeps going. We can just say square root of 2. It's the same. This is an exact value. Okay, this one we can never get exact until we write all of it out, okay, if it makes sense to you. All right, so whenever we see this length, then we can work backwards to get to this, or this length, we can work to get to that. So here's how we're going to do it. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is label the hypotenuse. Okay, so if we see this right over here, the hypotenuse is the one that is across from the 90 degree, right? So we're going to label that H for hypotenuse. Okay, so then we're going to decide if it's 45, 45, 90. Well, this one is 45, 45, right? So this is the formula that we're going to use. The hypotenuse, okay, right? This hypotenuse is going to be equal to the leg, right? We know these are called legs. Let's go and label those, right? This one and this one are called legs, right? And this is the hypotenuse, right? So the hypotenuse is equal to the leg times the square root of 2. Okay, so if we're given the hypotenuse, then we just multiply, if we're given a leg, we just multiply by square root of 2 to equal the hypotenuse, right? And then if we're going this way by multiplying, then we just go work backwards by dividing, right? So if we're given this and we're trying to find the leg, right? If we're given the leg, we said we just multiply times square root of 2 to get to here. If we're given the hypotenuse, we're going to divide by the square root of 2. So we're going to think the leg is equal to the hypotenuse divided by the square root of 2. Okay, so if we're going this way, we're going to multiply, right? And if we're going this way, we're going to divide. All right, and it will make perfect sense to you when we're done, but that's what we're going to think. And that makes sense, right? If we're going from something smaller to bigger, we have to multiply, right? Because if this is x times 1.4, so that's going to get bigger, right? And if we're going from this to something smaller, we have to divide, right? Either subtract or divide, but we're working with factors, so we're going to divide, right? Because this is x times that, and this is just x, right? All right, so let's get right into some practice. All right, so it says the figure below is a square. Okay, so we know this is the square, right? So we know that this side is 2, right? And so if it's a square, then we know that this side is also 2 if it's a square, right? Because it's all sides are the same length. Okay, and we also know that that's a 90-degree angle, right? Those are all 90 degrees. Okay, so find the side length of the side x. So this is, we said the first step is going to label the hypotenuse. So this is the hypotenuse, right? Because let's take a look at this. Imagine, right, if this is a square, right? That's making a square just like that, right? So if we know that, and we know that this is a diagonal, right? Then we said that it has to be a 45, 45, 90, right? It has to be a 45, 45, 90. So if it is, we are given a leg, right? This is a leg. So we're given the leg and we're trying to find the hypotenuse, right? So let's look at what we just said. We said the hypotenuse, which is x, right? So we're going to say that's what we're trying to find, right? Is equal to the leg, which is 2, times the square root of 2. Right? The leg times the square root of 2, because that's what we're going to say. We're going to say the hypotenuse is equal to the leg times the square root of 2. Okay? So if we do that, then we're setting it up just like that, because the x is that. So this is stuff that we can just type into our Desmos. Okay? So we're going to put that into Desmos, and that's going to be equal to, we're going to say x is approximately 2.828. It wants to the nearest tenth. Right, so that means one digit. So I'm just going to change this to different colors. So that means we're going to underline the 8, right? And we're going to ask, what do we do with the 2? All right, so bring down what you think the answer is. It is, of course, 2.8. Okay, so that's our answer, 2.8, approximately 2.8. All right, so let's get right into another one. All right, it says this is a square, find the side length of x. All right, so x right over here, right? If we know that this is a diagonal, then we know that this has to be a 45, right? And that has to be a 45, and that has to be a 90, right? So if we imagine this triangle, right? This is our hypotenuse, right? If that's a hypotenuse, then this is the leg, right? So what did we say? We said the leg is equal to the hypotenuse divided by the square root of 2, right? So the leg is equal to the hypotenuse divided by the square root of 2, right? So the leg is x, right? X is equal to, we said the hypotenuse goes on top, right? So the hypotenuse is the square root of 10. And on bottom is the square root of 2. Not 2, but the square root of 2, right? So you got to be making sure that you're using that square root symbol on both of those. Okay, so now this is something that we can type right into Desmos. So if we put that right into Desmos, that's going to give us x is approximately 2.236. Okay, so that means if we are going to the nearest tenth, okay, bring down what you think is the right answer. That's going to be approximately 2.2. Right? All right, so it's as simple as that. Okay, so this one was 2.8, approximately 2.8. That's approximately 2.2. All right, so see if you can get this one on your own. At least try to set it up. All right, so, well, what do we notice? We notice those, right? What does that tell us about the sides? That tells us that the sides are congruent, right? So if this one is 6, that means this one has to be 6, right? And if that's 90, if those are the same, right? If these are both same, then these have to be 45. 45, right? So, because that's what we're recognizing, okay, is that if two sides are the same, and the other one's a 90 degree, these have to be 45 because these sides, these angles have to be the same, right? So that's what we want to recognize. This has to be a 45, 45, 90. Okay? So if it is 45, 45, 90, we're trying to find the length of side x to the nearest tenth. So this one is like hypotenuse, right? So let's look at what we said. We said the hypotenuse is equal to the leg times the square root of 2, right? Hypotenuse is equal to the leg times the square root of 2. So that means x, right, is going to be equal to, we said the leg, right? So the leg is that, right? Because we know the leg is on either side of the right triangle, right? Either side of the right angle. Okay, so the leg times the square root of 2. So 6 times the square root of 2. Okay, so now what we want to recognize is this is all stuff that our calculator will understand. And so we're just going to type that right into Desmos. So that means it's going to be approximately 6 times the square root of 2 is also 8.485, right? So if we want to round to the nearest tenth, what are we going to bring down? We're going to say that 4 turns into a 5, right? And then we're going to go from there and then go there, right? Because the 5 or more raised to score, right? Approximately 8.5. All right, nice. See if you can get this last one on your own. Pause the video. See if you can get this last one on your own. All right, so on this one, it says find the length of side x, right, to the nearest tenth. Okay, well, what do we notice? We notice it's a 90, a 45, and a 45. Okay, so that tells us that if this is x, then this side is also what? X, right? So we said the first thing we're going to do is label the hypotenuse, right? That's a hypotenuse. So we're trying to find the leg, right? Well, what do we know? We said the leg is equal to the hypotenuse divided by the square root of 2 when we're talking about a 45, 45, 90, right? So let's write that down. Leg is equal to the hypotenuse divided by the square root of 2, right? Not just 2, but square root of 2. Okay, so we're going to say the leg, which is x, is equal to the hypotenuse of 11 divided by the square root of 2. Okay, so what we want to recognize is this is something that can go right into our calculator, right? So that means it's going to be approximately, right, instead of 11 over the square root of 2, it's going to be approximately 7.778. So bring that down. What are you going to round that to the nearest tenth? You're going to say that 7, right? You're going to ask that 7 is going to raise it to an 8, 7, approximately 7.8. All right, so how about you go ahead and do these practice problems on this page first, and then we'll go to the next page. All right, so hopefully you did that those practice problems first, because we're going to shift gears completely and think about something else similar, but we can do this, but we got to shift gears a little bit to higher level. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what's called a 30, 60, 90. Okay, so if you add those up, those add to how much? 180 degrees. Exactly right. Because we know 30 and 60 is 90, plus another 90 equals 180. But these are special right triangles. So 30, 60 triangle, 60, 90 is like this, right? So if we know that that's 90, right? If that's 90. If that's 30, then that has to be 60, right? Because we would say 180 minus 30, right? If that's 60, that has to be 30, right? So you might see it different ways, right? But this is just the same thing as this. So these have a special relationship as well. Now, how is it created? It's created when an equilateral triangle is divided in two. So if we divide it into like that, okay, we know that that's going to be 90 degrees, right? Well, if we said it was equilateral, that means that's 60, right? If we're cutting this in half, right? Let's think about that. If we cut that in half, now each one of those, this is going to be 30 and that's 30, right? Because we said it was equilateral. That was 60, that was 60, this was 60. That cuts that into 30. Well, now we have a 30, 60, 90 special right triangle. Okay, so that looks very similar to that, right? And then, of course, we have another one. Those are both equal, right? But these always have a special relationship, okay? And so that's what we're practicing now. So on um, this one is always going to be what we're going to call the short leg. Okay, this is the hypotenuse, right? And then this is the long leg. Okay, so if we imagine this is the long leg, right? This is going to be the short leg, and that's going to be the hypotenuse. Okay, so in that situation, if we know the short value, then we can calculate the long. If we know the short, we can calculate the hypotenuse. If we know the long, we can work backwards. So obviously, if we're going to work from a longer piece to a shorter piece, we're going to divide, right? We're going to divide to go that way, right? If we're going from a shorter piece to a longer, we know the hypotenuse is the longest piece. This way, we got to have to multiply, right? Right? So we're not going to go on this 30, 60, 90. We're not going to go from hypotenuse to long. We're not going to go this way. We're going to go make sure that we go this way or this way. Okay, so if we're going from a hypotenuse to long, we're going to go from hypotenuse to short first, then from short to long, right? And so if we're going from short to long, then this way we would multiply, right? And if we're going from this way, from hypotenuse to short, right, we would divide, right? We would divide this way, right? And it'll make sense here in just a moment because we're working with factors, right? So if we're going from a bigger number to a smaller number and working with factors, it has to either be dividing or multiplying, right? So this is the same way, right? So if we're going from here to here, we have to multiply to go that way, right? If we're going from here to here, we have to multiply to get to that value, right? Here to here, we have to divide, but we're not going to go directly this way. We're not going to go that way, okay? We are going to go that way, and then that way, or backwards, right? So we're going to go this way or this way. We're not going to go this way, right? Okay, so keeping that in mind, this is what we're going to do. All right, so if it is, we're going to always label the hypotenuse. We're going to decide, is it a 30, 60, 90? Okay, if it is, these are the things that we're going to think of. All right, so first off, if we are going from, let me do this, from short to the long, okay? From the short to long, we're going to multiply by the square root of 3, okay? If we are going from the long to the short, we're going to divide by the square root of 3, okay? So if we are going from the short to the hypotenuse, we're going to multiply by 2. If we're going from the hypotenuse to the short, right, from longer to short, as you might imagine, we're going to divide, right? We're going to divide by 2. So that's how factors work, right? If we're going from a short to a longer one, we're going to have to multiply. If we're going from a longer one to a short, we have to divide, right? If we're going from a short piece to a long, we have to multiply, right? If we're going from a long to a short, we would have to divide, right? And then this is the trickiest one. All right, so this is where we have to really focus the most. Okay, if we're going from the long to the short to the hypotenuse, this is the path we're going to do. We're going to first divide by the square root of 3, then we're going to multiply by 2. Okay, and if we're going the other way, right, instead of going from long to hypotenuse, if we go from hypotenuse to long, so I'm just going to put this in different colors so you can see it. From the hypotenuse to the long, then we're going to do the backwards. We're going to divide by 2 and then multiply by square root of 3. So instead of divide by square root of 3, multiply by 2, we're going to do backwards, right? So we're going to divide by 2 and then multiply by square root of 3. All right, so I know that sounds tricky, but you got this. Just follow the steps, right? We're just going to follow these hints. So this is what we need to focus on right over here. Okay, and you'll see how this is very helpful. All right, so make sure that you recognize what we're looking at. All right, so let's look at this one right over here. It says this triangle below is an equilateral. Oh, equilateral. What does that tell us? That tells us this one is 60, right? That's 60. And then if this is 90, right? And that's 60, each of those have to be 30, right? Has to be 30, has to be 30. Okay, so we know we're dealing with a 30, 60, 90, right? And so that's what we'll recognize in all of these. So find the length of side x. So first step, we got to label that hypotenuse, all right? So recognize that we're talking about like this triangle right over here, right? They're both two triangles that are the same, right? So this is that's going to be the long, this is hypotenuse, right? That's going to be a hypotenuse. Let's go ahead and label the short side with a S. It's an S for short. And then this is going to be the long side. I'm going to put an L for the long side, right? Because we have a short side, right? We're going to have a medium, long side, and then we're going to have the hypotenuse. Short, long, and hypotenuse. All right. So short, long, hypotenuse. So keeping that in mind, what do we got? We're going from the short. No, I'm sorry. What information do we have? I'm sorry. We have the long, right? From the long to the short. All right, that's what we want to think. From the long, right? We're given the long side, and we don't want to find the hypotenuse. We want to find the short. So let's go ahead and look at what we said from the long to short. From long to short, we're going to divide by the square root of 3. Okay, so we're going to take what we have, which is 10. So we're going to say x is equal to 10 divided by square root of 3. Okay, so once we recognize that, that's the hardest part, is knowing what to type into our calculator. So if we do that, we're going to see that x is approximately 5.773. So if it wants to the nearest tenth, what would the answer be? Okay, that's right. We're going to raise that to an 8, and it's 5 approximately 5.8. All right, let's keep it moving. We're going to just keep it going just like that, all right? So it tells us equilateral, all right? So that we know we're dealing with the 30, 60, 90, right? All right, so find the length of side x. So what do we know? This is our hypotenuse, right? So we want to recognize that we're thinking about this triangle right here. Okay, so that's the hypotenuse right over there, right? So let's go and label our sides. This is going to be the short side, and this is going to be the long side, right? So the long side is the square root of 7, and we're trying to find the hypotenuse. So from the long to the hypotenuse. From the long to the hypotenuse, this is what we're going to do right over here, right? So we're going to first divide by the square root of 3, then multiply by 2. So we're going to say x is going to be equal to the square root of 7. Okay, we said first we're going to divide by the square root of 3. So divide by the square root of 3. All right, we're going to write this out first, then we'll type it in. So we're going to put that in parentheses, right? We started with the square root of 7. We divide by the square root of 3. This is tricky, but you got this. Then multiply by 2. Okay, so times 2. Okay, so this is what we are going to type into our Desmos. Okay, so if we do that, then that means x is going to be approximately 3.055, right? So what would that be? That would be approximately 3.1, right? Because we would look to that 5 and it told us to raise that. So that would be our answer, approximately 3.1. All right, let's keep it moving. You got this. All right, it's an equilateral triangle, right? So we know if that cuts it, right, that has to be a 60 and that has to be a 30, right? So this is this and this is this. So let's think about this triangle, right? What do we know first? This is our hypotenuse, right? This is the short leg, right? This is the long leg, right? So the long leg is x. We're trying to find the long leg, and we're given the hypotenuse. So we're going from hypotenuse to long. From hypotenuse to long. Okay, from hypotenuse to long, we're going to first divide by 2, then multiply times the square root of 3. Okay, so we said x is going to be equal to, you're given, right? We said we're starting from the hypotenuse, which is 9. Okay, we said the first thing was going to divide by 2. Okay, let's go and put that in parentheses, right? Then multiply times the square root of 3. So we're just going to put times the square root of 3. Okay, that's the hardest part, is recognizing what to type in to Desmos. Okay, so this is what we're going to type into Desmos. Okay, if we do that, that means x is approximately 7.794, right? So what would you bring down? That would say approximately 7.8. That's right, approximately 7.8. Okay, let's keep it moving. Find the length of side x. See if you can get this one. All right, let's look at the information we have. All right, so that's what we're trying to find. We know that it is a 30, 60, 90 special right triangle. Let's label our sides, right? This is going to be the hypotenuse, right? This is going to be the short leg, and this is going to be the long, right? So if we know that, we're going from what? We're going from the long to the short, right? From the long to the short. Where's from long to short? It says from long to the short, we're just going to divide by the square root of 3. Okay, so we're going to say x is equal to 9 divided by the square root of 3. Okay, so that's what we need to type into our Desmos, right? So if we do that, that means that x is going to be approximately 5.196, right? So if you round that to the nearest tenth, what's our answer going to be? It's going to be approximately 5.2, right? Because that 9 tells us to raise that. All right, let's go. See if you got this one. All right, let's keep it moving. It says find the length of x. All right, so we know it's a 30, 60, 90 special right triangle, right? So let's label our sides. This is going to be our hypotenuse, right? This is going to be our short leg, right? Because our short leg is across from the 30, right? Short is across from the 30, right? Long is across from the 60. Short makes sense, right? The shorter one has to be there. So this one across from the 30 has to be the short. So this is the long. Okay, so we're going from short to the hypotenuse. Short to hypotenuse. So what do we say? Short to hypotenuse. From the short to hypotenuse, we just multiply times 2. And it's just twice as long. So we're going to say x is going to be equal to the square root of 11 times 2. So if you just type that into your calculator, square root of 11 times, actually, I'm sorry, make sure you do this, okay, because I don't want you to get it wrong. You could also think of it like this, 2 times the square root of 11. And that's a better way of thinking of it. Okay, so 2 times the square root of 11. So this is what I would type in. Okay, so if you do that, then that's going to be equal to approximately, what, 6.633. So bring down our answer. That's going to be approximately 6.6 still, right? Stay 6.6. All right, keep it going. Let's go with this last one. Let's go. 90. Ooh, that's a 30, 60, 90. Okay, we know the relationship, right? What is this? We know that this is our hypotenuse. We know this is a short, right? We know that this is the long, right? Because long is across from 60, 30 is across from short. So what do we know? We're trying to find the long from hypotenuse. So hypotenuse to the long. Hypotenuse to the long. Let's check it out. What do we say? Hypotenuse to the long. Hypotenuse to long, we're going to divide by 2, then multiply by square root of 3. Okay? So divide by 2, then multiply times square root of 3. So x is 4 divided by 2 times the square root of 3. Okay? So that's what we're going to type into our Desmos. Okay? So if you do that, type it in just like that, right? Looks weird, but that's okay. Then that's going to be approximately what? 3.464. So bring down our final answer. It's going to be approximately 3.5. Very good. Approximately 3.5. All right, you got this. I know the video was a little bit longer, but we had to go into depth. So here's the deal. Let's go back and talk about it. 45, 45, 90. If we know that two sides are the same and we know it's a 90 degree, then we know these have to be 45. Or if we know these are 45, then we know that the relationship on these is that these sides have to be the same, and those are the legs. So if we're going from the short side, which is the leg, to the hypotenuse, we have to multiply times the square root of 2. And if we're going backwards, then we have to divide, right? And then if we know that if it's a 30, 60, 90, that we're just going to follow these other relationships.